Now, the Torah of Yehovah, Bereshit, which is Genesis 1:1 through Genesis 6:8. Now, I want to give you a bit of an overview regarding this whole thing. I don't know how many of you have generally... do we have a show of hands about people who have actually gone through the Torah cycle before? One or two of you? Read through it. You know, the Torah cycle, you've read through it each week, or maybe have followed along with a preacher online or something who has gone through the Torah cycle. So, not very many, but that's good, though. That's good. This will be an awesome experience for those who haven't done it yet. So, the Torah cycle is basically what was done a long time ago to actually divide up all 5 books of Moses into essentially a series of readings. There are 52 weeks in the year, but there are not exactly 52 readings because there are special days in there when they don't read the Torah cycle. They do something slightly different for, you know, if it happens to fall on a holy day or something like that, it could be slightly more, slightly less. And they do cycle through every once in a while to be a little bit different, but that's the whole point of this, is to break up the Torah of Moses into sections so that you'll read through the whole Torah every year. And this is what happens in every synagogue around the world. Most of them are going to be on the Torah cycle, so that if you go to any synagogue in any city, in any country, at any time, they're all going to be reading the same portion of Scripture, which is quite fascinating. Do you see any benefits for that?
Community.
Yeah, there's going to be a real sense of community from people all over the world who are reading the same section of Scripture. And imagine also with the advent of computers and the internet that a lot of these rabbis are online talking about the same stuff every week, and you can just gain so many different and amazing insights and wisdom. You can glean some wisdom from these Torah portions from all over the world. It's quite fascinating, and they've been doing it for a long, long time.
I've seen examples of just that, where they have found tribes of people, small tribes that claim they are descendants of a tribe of one of Jacob's sons.
Yeah.
And the people around them are like, "You're what?" And they don't believe them till they start talking about the Torah cycle, and they are all on the same cycle yet.
Isn't that interesting?
From
going way back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Millennia.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. So the Torah cycle is simply, like I said, just breaking up the Torah into sections that are read each week. Now, long ago, in approximately 650 BC, they also began to take sections of the prophets and the writings that corresponded to the Torah portion. There was like some similar theme, some similar language, or maybe some insight on that Torah portion from one of the prophets or writings or Psalms, and they created what's called the Haftarah. That's not the same word. It sounds like Torah, but it's not. It's Tarah, Haftarah. So, and then some enterprising Christian Torah keepers integrated the New Testament, so that for example, the reading for one of the readings in the New Testament for today's reading of Bereshit is in John 1:1, because it says, "In the beginning was the Word," and so it's quite fascinating when you read the Torah portion. It's quite fascinating, and I highly encourage you to look at the Torah portion and read the portion of the prophets, and then read the portion in the New Testament, because it shows you the Torah of Moses and the prophets and the disciples talking about the same things in every one of them. It's quite fascinating.
When you talked about the Haftarah, I had heard that when the Jews were persecuted and they were in an area where they were not allowed to have the 5 books.
Right.
The first 5 books.
Yep.
They took the themes that they knew of each of the Torah portions,
Right.
and found the corresponding theme in the writings and the prophets.
Yeah.
And that's where the Haftarah.
I have heard that too. I haven't dug any to see how true it is. It might be some writings in the Mishnah or the Talmud, but yes, that is what I have heard also, is that in periods in history where they have been under some tyrant who says you can't read the Torah, that they have still had access to the writings and the prophets, and they would just search those and scour them, and because they knew their Torah portions, because they would do them every single year, they would find things that were connected, and they began to divide them up. And so that makes good sense. I don't see any reason why that's not true, but yes, that is my understanding also. So there's that. And then when was it introduced? As far as we know, according to the writings of the sages of Israel, it was introduced by the elders under Ezra and Nehemiah when they came back from Babylon, is when they actually introduced this cycle of doing the Torah readings. So that goes back to 650 BC that they have been doing this. That's a long, long time. So they've been doing this for a long, long time. Now, why? Why was it introduced? Well, because under Ezra and Nehemiah, they believed that the people had been straying from the commands of God because they simply weren't exposed to it very often. And so they said, this is where they introduced the synagogue system, because they had invented the synagogue system in Babylon because they had no temple, and they wanted to get together and keep the Sabbath days and whatnot. So they got together and they began to study their Torahs. They broke it up into sections, and that's when they introduced it. And why they introduced it is because they wanted to get the people into the groove of reading the Scriptures and knowing the Scriptures. And they thought maybe they won't go astray, maybe they'll get better at keeping the commandments if they become more familiar with them, if we have them read them. Jerry?
Wasn't there a time before that when they read the Torah to the people once every 70 years?
That's what's supposed to happen. As to whether they actually did that, the only example that we know of where that happened is in the book of Nehemiah.
So when the guy got grown up, he would have heard it at least 3 times.
Yeah, you would hope. But we don't have any examples of them actually doing it. The first example in the Bible is when Nehemiah and Ezra came back, and it was said, they got together and they held the feast for 7 days, and they read the Torah out loud for the people, and then had people walking through the crowd that could help the people to understand if they didn't understand what was being said. Theoretically, every Shemitah cycle, they're supposed to read the entire Torah over the Feast of Sukkot. So that's what's supposed to happen. As to whether it happened or not, I don't know. It was decided that we need to do this to get the people steeped in the Scriptures, so that they can maybe, hopefully, not stray away from the truth like they have continuously done. Was that successful? I don't know. That's a good question to contemplate. I mean, do you guys go astray? I know I do. And I think, we know our Scriptures fairly well, probably as well as a lot of people in history. And just because you know your Scriptures doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do it. That's definitely helpful, though. You can't do it if you don't know it. But you can know it and not do it. Angela?
But you know you've gone astray.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. However, we're going to talk about that in a second. Theoretically. Possibly. There is a real likelihood that even then you won't.
Well.
We'll talk about that in a minute. Tracy?
You can become callous to it.
Absolutely you can. Absolutely you can.
It makes me think of the scriptures in James where it talks about to look in the mirror, and the man looks in the mirror and sees himself and walks away and
forgets
what he saw.
Immediately, yeah.
Be hearers of the word and not doers. Be doers of the word and not hearers of the word.
That's right. So it's real easy to become a hearer of the word. And, there was a story about a rabbi who died, and there was a great big procession and mourning of like hundreds of people came to his little town when he died. And there was one rabbi who was from a neighboring town, and all the people from his town were going to the rabbi's funeral. And they said to the other rabbi, "Aren't you going to come?" And he's like, "No." Why not? Well, why would I go and celebrate a donkey? And they said, what? He was a great rabbi. Very respected. And he said, he was nothing more than a donkey carrying books. And they didn't understand what he was talking about. And he said, he was not a good man. He knew the Torah like the back of his hand, but he was not a good man. He was like a donkey carrying a stack of books. I thought, wow, that's pretty harsh. But can we become donkeys carrying a stack of books? Yes, we can.
You're saying somebody else is, you better beware.
Yeah, seriously. I hope that he was speaking. I hope that he was speaking righteously, because that's some evil speech. But apparently, I don't know. Maybe he knew him better than others. I just thought it was fascinating.
So going back to Nehemiah, right? So this is the very month that they explained the Torah to the people.
Right.
And going back to what we were just talking about, knowing it and becoming callous, these people, they were made to understand.
Right.
That's when they all cried out.
Right.
And repented at that point.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And I think that that's something we need to kind of take a look at, because I know from my own reading of the Bible, whatever it is, whether it's a Torah Cycle or whatever, I can real perfunctorily open that Bible and read it through and just go in one ear and out the other. And I can read and have good comprehension. You ask me what I just read, I'll tell you while I'm thinking about something else. It's real easy to do. It happens all the time. But then there are other times when I'll be reading it, and it takes so long. It takes so long because I really easily get sidetracked by a word, and I'm looking up that word, and then I'm digging around, and I can get stuck on just 2 verses, and I could spend an hour just reading through this 2 sentences over and over and looking at where have I heard this before and what does this word mean, and that's when I'm learning. I'm learning a lot, but I'm going really slow. And you can real easily read through some passages and just not really get anything from it. You really have to go slow. And I apologize to this son of mine, but I'm going to use him as an example. Because they were supposed to do their Torah reading, and I said, hey, did you do your Torah reading? He's like, no, I'm going to do that right now. I said, okay. He took off to read Ephesians chapter 5. And he came back 5 minutes later, and like he was ready to rock. And I said, really? It's okay. Tell me what it was about. He's like, I think I need to read it again. I said, I think you might. So he did.
Hey, been there, done that.
We do that all the time. I don't mean to kick you under the bus there, buddy, but I'm just saying we need to read carefully. And I have tried to tell them, look, if you're going to read a passage for the readings, you got to read it at least twice and in a different translation.
Do you have an idea how they did it? Well, back in the time when they were still sitting on the Moses seat, so to say, and were teaching or preaching, and they were reading the Torah session. Do you think that after that they were discussing it?
Yeah, that's
reading straight.
Yeah, no, that's both. But my understanding, and I don't know how many of you have actually ever been in a Sabbath service. Have you guys? What is that? How many of you guys have been into a like a Catholic service? Anybody ever been to a Catholic service? How long are those?
Not very long.
No, they're pretty short. Now, I have been in a service a couple of times in my life that's like, most church services are about how long? Hour 20, 2 hours. I mean, when we used to go to school, church when we were kids, they had 1 hour of worship and 1 hour of teaching. And that seemed long to me. A lot of the churches these days are going real fast. They're moving through pretty quick. If you go to a synagogue, any kind of a conservative synagogue, it's like 4 hours. It's not short. So, they will read. They have a period of prayer. They have a period of singing. They'll read the whole portion. They'll read some of the Haftorah portions. And you can see Yeshua doing that. When it came time to read the Haftorah portion, if there's a special guest in the synagogue, they'll have him open up the... Angela, would you extricate this cat for me? She's trying to attack me from the back here. Yeah, she's feeling a little spunky there.
They've been.
I'll take her.
No, she's Mike.
What's interesting, I was just looking from John's question here about in Nehemiah where it talks about them. They caused the people to understand the law.
Yeah.
People stood in their place. So they read the book in the law of God distinctly.
Yeah.
And you know what that word distinctly is? It's parash.
Isn't that interesting? Parsha. The Parsha is the sections of the Torah. So yeah, that's an excellent insight. And yes, my understanding is that in most, even in modern synagogues, they're going to read it to you and they're going to discuss. They're going to give a mini sermon. It's just like a Christian church, essentially, except that they read the portion and then discuss it, tell you what they think it means, And interestingly enough, there is a lot of commentary from the Talmud. You know that the Talmud is simply a commentary. I mean, I own many Christian commentaries from some of the all-time greats, who have that's what the Talmud is a commentary on the Torah. Bunches and bunches of it. And so, yeah, you'll hear that incorporated as well. But good questions. So that's why these things were introduced. Now, why should a Christian read the Torah? Why should a Christian perhaps read the Torah Cycle? What? It's the Word of God. It is your instruction manual. It is an instruction manual. Absolutely. So I think that we have to have a clear understanding of what it means, and this would be my hope and prayer for each of you as we go through the Torah cycle, is to have an understanding of what it means to love the Lord your God and what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. That's what it all is about. That's what Yeshua said, and that's what we know, is that the Torah is all about what it means to love God and what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. There are a couple of other things that I want to get to as far as what my hope is, aside from that, is basically I'll come to that in just a sec. So how is this going to work each week? I want you, as much as possible, if you can, to read that portion. Sometimes they're long, and you could be reading 10 chapters. But really, really try, if you can, to set aside some time. Audio Bible, if you're driving. If you're doing something in the kitchen, lay your phone on the counter and have somebody read it to you. It's all online. You can get audio Bibles for free these days. Some of the apps that you have in your phone will read it to you. Just really try to ingest that throughout the week. It will make our time together of being able to discuss it so much more fruitful, I think, for you, if you've had an opportunity to read through that portion. And if you have any problems, I use Hebrew for Christians. There's a website called Hebrew for Christians, which has a lot of very, very good information. But there's this Torah Cycle section on there that tells you what the portion is in the Torah and the prophets and the writings and the New Testament for each week. It even has a little calendar widget that I was just sharing with Mike earlier, where right at the top it's got a little button you can click, and if you use a Google Calendar or the iCalendar from your iPhone, it'll suck it right into your phone. So that each Saturday, it'll tell you what the Torah portion is. That's all you have to do. And you just Google Torah portions and you can find them all. It'll tell you what day it's being read on and which portions. And so I want you to try to read through it prior to. Now this week is a little bit different because our schedule is a little wacky. But when we get together next time on November 2nd or 1st, Torah portion Noach is what we're going to be discussing, and I hope that you will have read it already. Okay, that'll just make so much better discussion, I think, if you're all familiar with it. Did you want to say something, Angela?
No.
Oh, okay. The second thing that I want you to focus on, as you're reading through these, like I said, reading the Torah portion, reading the Haftorah portion, reading the New Testament portion.
Sorry.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
I just missed, you want us to read through what by next week?
That would be Torah portion Noah, which I don't have the actual sections in there. If anybody has those, would you share them with Jan? Or I can just touch bases with me afterwards, and I'll make sure that you know. And thank you for reminding me of that, Jan. I will when we are wrapping up each portion for the evening, I'll put up what the reading is for the week. I think that would be a good idea. Yes.
It's 6:9 to 11:32.
Okay, so that's only 2 chapters. So 6:9 through 11:32.
So all the way.
That's 5 chapters. I apologize. I'm terrible at math.
At this point, since we
All
didn't
the
have
way,
to
yeah.
for this.
Yeah,
By next week, 11 chapters.
Yeah.
5 chapters.
We don't meet Fridays, we have like a week and a half.
Yeah, and you've got like a week and a half to 2 weeks for that.
Okay.
Tracy?
I would just suggest, if you don't mind, when you send out the video each week, that you
Yeah.
just put in there, next week we're doing this, so then
Yeah,
we know.
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I haven't been sending those out. I don't know if you've noticed that. I haven't been sending out emails to every week to say, hey, in case you missed us. Just got away from it just because I updated the website to put those things right on the front page of the website. I probably will update the website so that it shows what the Torah portion is going to be for the week. But it'd probably be a good idea for me to just email it to people. But I don't. You guys are terrible communicators for email. I don't get very much response from people in email. Carla is a good communicator. The rest of you have been kicked under the bus. No, I'm kidding. Tracy's really good.
Still not on the list. Okay.
Sorry. So you see, we're having communication troubles.
I teach in communications. I promise I will get to this. I'm making a commitment.
Well, I will check that. So 2 things from Jan. Make sure that the Torah portions are posted at the end of the lesson and get her on the dang list. I apologize. Sorry, Jan. So, yes, I probably will update that and send it out to everybody. But as you're reading the Torah portion for the week, I'd like for you, and you're doing the Haftarah and the New Testament portion, I want you to pay attention to these 5 things, okay? The one thing is, what does this teach me about how to love the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength? What does this teach me about how I should love my neighbor as myself? What does this teach me about God? What does this teach me about myself? And is there something that I need to do? That's what my hope is for you, is to understand and integrate into your life those 5 things. Because the Torah is essentially about how to love the Lord your God and how to love your neighbor as yourself. I want you to try, and I intend to focus on these 5 things as we're discussing and talking about the whole Torah. I want to take away from it everywhere possible. How do we love the Lord our God? How do we love each other as ourselves? What does this teach me about God and His character? And what does this teach me about myself and my own faults and things that I need to watch for myself? And is there something in this section that I need to do in my life? Is there some command? Does it say thou shalt? If it says thou shalt, then thou shalt if thou canst. Does that make sense? So I want to do that. I want to try to hit those 5 points every possible way that we can, so that it becomes practical, very practical for us, okay? So, and if you have insights into those 5 categories as we're reading along, bring them up, because that's what I want to focus on. I want us to get better understanding of God, ourselves, loving others, and what do I need to do. Make sense?
Yes.
Awesome. Now, what? Oh, sorry.
Okay. I went into 5 questions. She says he has them written down. So then I go to take a screenshot. He said, but it's written in Dutch.
I think he's making a joke.
Are you going to email the 5 questions?
That's funny. Yes,
Thank
Okay.
you.
I can do that too. That's not a problem.
That's a good thing.
That's not a problem.
English, please.
In English. I won't send it to you in Dutch, yes. Or Hebrew, yeah. So, I want you to know, because you guys are readers and you know your Bibles, I hope. That's why I'm talking about these 5 things, okay? That's why I want to hit these 5 things, is because I'm not likely to reveal something to you, some secret esoteric knowledge or some hidden wisdom that you don't already know. Sorry, John. It will come up, I'm sure, periodically, but don't look to me for that, okay? I want you to get practical with this. Yes, there is amazing hidden wisdom in there, and we're going to hit on it. You can't help but stumble over it every once in a while, but I really want it to be practical for you and useful for you, okay? That's all I have to say about that. Yes.
Will we be going around and each answering all those 5 questions?
No, but thank you for asking that question.
I would like.
I'll bet you would. I'm being ornery. I apologize. Yeah, sorry. What?
Share at own name.
Yeah, and that's absolutely. But as I'm talking about them, I'll be looking to incorporate those things. So I won't ask you about them necessarily, but I'll definitely be incorporating them. Angela?
I think you're already going to be challenged just to try and cover.
Oh, absolutely.
7
It's going to be horrifying for me. I hope you know that it's going to be disgusting. It's going to be horrible for me to try to cover 6 chapters of the Torah. You can tell this isn't going to happen. Okay, so
It hasn't even started, and it's 7:53.
But there's no pressure, we just.
I know, and that's why I said you guys already know your scriptures, and we're going to try to incorporate it as much as we can.
To being more quiet.
No, you're doing fine, Jan.
I'm a New Testament person, so I am very diligent about getting this correct.
Awesome.
Becoming a part of the group. So I would probably like to go ahead and answer these 5 questions by email.
Sure.
And then you could anonymously say, well, someone said this or someone said that. And then you can kind of answer within your thing. And so for any of us who really want to do that, we could just answer to you directly by email, right?
Not a bad idea. Sure.
Okay. And then it's like, it's nice to be personal, but at the same time, it takes less time if you already have,
Yeah.
like, what if 3 people say the same thing?
Sure.
Then you can just answer it, and we don't have to go around the room and have 3 people say the same thing.
Sure.
So
Sure.
I'm committed to answering the best of my ability as a New Testament person by email.
Well, I hope that at the end of this next year, you will not be only a New Testament
Well,
person.
not only.
I know. I'm saying, I'm hoping that you'll become more familiar. That's all. My hope is for
Well,
everybody.
My husband insists. What can I do?
My husband insists. Awesome. Okay. Now, here's an overview of Bereshit. These are the painting with a broad brushstroke. Angela?
Does everyone know how these portions get their names?
No.
Good insight. Thank you for asking that question. It's a good question. And frankly, there's some amazing wisdom right there if you want to just look through the Torah portions and find out what the names of them are and then read them in sequence. It's fascinating. Fascinating. So the Torah portions are taken from a word or phrase that's the first word or phrase in each section. So that's how they're named. Like this one, Bereshit, that's the first word in the Bible. That's why this is called Bereshit. Noach is the name of the Torah portion. The first or second word in the next Torah portion is Noach. Okay, so, and you know that in Hebrew, the names are not Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. What is it? Does anybody know? Quiz question number 2. What's in Hebrew? Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim. What do those mean in English? In the beginning.
And he called.
These are the names.
These are the names. And he called in the wilderness.
These are the words.
These are the words.
So where'd the Noah thing come from?
That's a portion within.
He just switched to the first 5 books.
Yeah, I just switched to the names of the first 5 books. And now these Torah portions are named after the sections of those books. So this is going to be an overview of the sections within this Torah portion, okay? So Genesis 1 to 2, 3, which is the creation of the cosmos and the world and man and Shabbat. Okay, that's the creation narrative. In Genesis 2, 4 through 25, you have the spiritual mission of man and the search for a suitable companion. We'll talk about a little bit about each one of these. In Genesis 3, we have the temptation and fall of mankind. In Genesis 4, we have Cain and Abel, the banishment of Cain, and the spread of the descendants of Cain. In Genesis 5, we had the descendants of Seth leading up to Noah. And then at the very beginning of Genesis 6, 1 through 8, judgment is decreed upon the world, and the remnant that shall be saved is selected. These are the 6 broad brushstrokes that I have painted with. This is not, who knows if that's some spiritual wisdom from the Hebrews, I don't know. I just broke it up that way because that's the way it made sense to me. Just looking through those and seeing this is how I would best put it together to give you a broad overview, okay? So, the next section I want to do before we dive into each of these sections is to remind you of a couple of things here. The purpose and the importance of the Torah. Remember the historical context of the Torah, that this book was written by Moses almost 2,000 years after the world was created. So remember that this Torah was written long after the events of the book of Genesis. And it was happening when they were coming out of Egypt. So why is that significant? Why is it significant that Moses was writing the history of the world 2,000 years or so after it happened? Keith?
God said, let me catch you up here.
Pretty much. I think
Your
that's
origin and why
absolutely.
you saved my people.
Absolutely. And I think, look at point 2 here. It says, why do we start the narrative 2,000 years in the past? Frankly, because the Hebrews probably forgot. I mean, do you realize how much the United States has changed in just 250 years? Now, by all accounts, the Hebrews were in Egypt for a minimum of 210 years and a maximum of 430 years, depending upon how you count the chronology. That's a long time to be steeped in a pagan culture of Egypt. So, and the way you see how they behaved when they were brought out as slaves, it seems like they didn't hardly know anything about this God. I mean, he had to teach Moses his name and kind of introduce himself to Moses. So it's very possible and likely that they simply forgot, and that he is reintroducing them to the importance of what came before and who were their ancestors and why were they chosen. And you have a backstory. You were selected as my people. You seem to have forgotten, but I haven't. That's super critical. Tracy?
And one of the things he shares with them is that in the Shema is that you're supposed to teach this word, this Torah, to your children and your children's children and so forth. And we see that was taking place because Abraham kept the Torah and these descendants were passing on the Torah, but then it was lost. So he brought them out of Egypt, not so much to get them out of Egypt, but to get the Egypt out of them and then bring them to himself so you can receive this word from the beginning again.
Yep. He's got to start over. He really does. And I think that's part of the reason, a big reason, why he is really enforcing that and telling, this is one of the strongest commandments of the Shema that is said every day, 2 or 3 times a day by Jews around the world, to remind themselves to listen to it, to speak it to their children, to write it upon their doors, to write it upon the gates, strap it to your forehead. I mean, he's getting a little ridiculous there, but yeah, strap it everywhere. We want to remember this. Angela?
In that documentary we saw that was very liberal.
Sure.
Fun.
Yeah.
It followed the history of the Jews.
Yep.
And
Tammy recommended that actually to me, and I thought it was quite fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the thing that they had through the whole, when they lost their possessions and their freedom and all, the thing that was focused on that they always had was the words, and no one could take those words away from them.
Yeah.
That's their inheritance.
It really is. You're absolutely right. To whatever degree they stuck to it and clung to it, that seems to have been the history of the Jews going back, is just having everything stripped away, and yet their traditions and the language and the culture and the words of the Torah was the thing that kept them all together somehow. And so, it's likely that they forgot, and that Moses is starting over and then getting them to know their backstory. Now, they needed to know who they were and where they came from and what their purpose was. That is so remarkably similar to what we are in right now in our lives, okay? Because I think, yeah, we're a religious country. At least we used to be. It's less so now than it was in previous times. But whether you think it was always a thin veneer of religiosity in American culture, or whether you think it run a little bit deeper, it was certainly more pronounced in previous generations. And here we are today with, it would have been really unusual, I think, to meet a person on the street and talk to them about Jesus and have them go, I know nothing about that. Today, that's very common, that you can talk to somebody about God or Jesus and, the Christianity, and they really have no idea. Because there have now been generations after generations in America that are of just completely irreligious people who have not read their Bibles, who have not gone to church, not gone to Sunday school. I mean, my grandfather, my dad's father, was very irreligious. He hated religion. And yet, he insisted that my dad and his sisters go to Sunday school. For some reason. They wouldn't go. He wouldn't go to Sunday school. He wouldn't go to church. But he'd send my dad and his sisters there. Even an irreligious person who, by all accounts, had no use for God at all, would send his children to Sunday school, to the local church, so that they could get some religion in them, get a little bit of morality, a little bit of ethics. It was at least valued to some degree. That is not the case anymore. And so the similarity with us in our time to these people in Egypt, I don't think it's quite gone that far, but maybe it has. Maybe it has, that we just don't have a clue about what is going on with our Bibles. I know that you people are different, because it seems to me if we could characterize the Hebrew roots, Messianic, whatever this is, it's people who want to know what their Bible says. And the rest seem to be maybe not. I don't know. But that seems to characterize the Hebrew roots movement, is people who want to read it, figure out what it means, listen to it, do it, taking it seriously. Back to basics is what you could call it. So it's really similar, remarkably similar to what's happening in this period right here. Is remarkably similar. And exactly what Paul said that in the book of Hebrews, that the things that happen to these people are for your instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come, right? So critical. That's why the Torah is another big thing that I hope that we'll focus on as we're reading through the Torah, is to pay attention to the writer of Hebrews telling us, man, everything that happened to those people is for your instruction. And I know you all believe that you're living at or near the end of the age. So the instruction from the Torah is absolutely critical. And I want you to remember about the preeminence of Torah. Okay? It is absolutely unique. Why is the Torah unique from any other writings in their Bible? Hayden?
Because God wrote it, so to speak. Moses wrote it, but it was narrated directly from God.
That is a good point, and that is exactly...
God was like people writing with the inspiration of God, not directly.
And there are sections of the Bible which are given through a revelation. But God himself said about Moses, with your prophets, I speak in a vision, in a dream, in a mirror darkly, as Paul would call it, but not so with my servant Moses. I speak to him like face to face, like a friend. So anybody should recognize this, that these 5 books of Moses were directly dictated by God. Now, please don't hear me denigrating other scriptures, because there are other people, other passages, other books of the Bible. John, for example, the revelation that he received, it was given to him to write down. The difference is he didn't understand it. He was told, write it down. I don't care whether you understand it. It's not for you. The same thing happened with Daniel. Sometimes Baruch, the amanuensis of Isaiah or Jeremiah, would write down the things that Jeremiah, or that's how we have those books. But they, in a lot of cases, didn't understand what they were writing down. And then you've got the witnesses of the New Testament saying, by the inspiration of the Scriptures, I'm going to record what I just saw. Everything that I met, everybody that I met, and when I met Yeshua, and from the beginning when I first met him until the time that he died and rose again, I need to tell everybody what I saw. Then you've got a bunch of sermonizing with Paul and Peter writing sermons. Are they inspired by the Spirit? Absolutely they are. But it's not the same. It is the same in the sense that it's the same message, elucidated by the power of the Spirit. But nobody is receiving directly from God the words saying, write this down. Write this down. That's a different thing. And Yeshua, of course, he's got a direct connection just exactly like Moses, or even more so. But nobody sat down and wrote down, okay, what did you say? We don't have that. We have some of it, but if sermons by Yeshua, him teaching directly, very little. I'd like to have a whole lot more. Tracy?
I think a great way to look at it too is that, literally the beginning of the Torah is called the beginning, in the beginning.
Yeah.
And all life starts with a seed. So the Torah represents this seed, this beginning, that everything else grows out from.
Right.
So what we're seeing is the fruit of that seed.
Yeah.
Everything bearing witness to
Absolutely.
that one.
I would say that as 100% my perspective, is that everything that comes after the Torah is it just growing and growing and growing and being explained and applied, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger until Yeshua arrives and just says, let me tell you what's up. I'll tell you what it means.
If you sow your vineyard with two different kinds of seed, the fruit of your vineyard will be defiled.
Yes.
So we don't want to mix that seed with man's word or any other doctrine.
Right.
Try to keep it,
Keep it pure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Gracie and then Jerry.
It makes me think of when Jerry and I are watching stuff or talking about some Parsha, and he's pointed out over and over and over again that the Lord said, and I'm not sure what the scripture is, that when you want to look and see if something is true, that if God or the prophets haven't said it,
Test everything.
watch out.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I had never stopped and thought of that when I was growing up in the church. It just never really occurred to me until several months ago when he said it. It just
That's absolutely
I heard
true.
him say it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
It just dawned on me.
And
God said that.
that's one of the
People are going to look back and try to
Absolutely.
recreate the wheel.
That's one of the big things that I hope also that we'll be digging through as we're going through the Torah. Is I want to see. It was one of the best things that I ever had happen to me. It was being under a teacher for a year through this cycle, where he was focusing heavily on, let me show you Yeshua in the Torah, everywhere. It's like, wow, that's pretty neat. But I would say, as we're going through this Torah, we need to determine, and I will make this assertion to you, that everything is in there. Every set of instructions, everything you need to do, the history of the world, prophecy of the Messiah, prophecy of the end of the world, everything is there.
Just like a seed.
It's just like a seed. It is. Now, sometimes it's right on the surface and you'll trip over it. If it was a snake, it would have bit you. Other times, you need to dig a little bit deeper because it's hidden. It's kind of a mysterious level beneath. But everything that you need to know, the history of the world, Yeshua, all of it is there. Every single bit of it. Jerry.
Do you think that there's any books that might have come over with Moses, like maybe Enoch or the book of, the Noah,
There's
the book of Adam and Eve?
Yeah, there certainly seems to have been some. The book of Job, by all accounts, is the oldest book in our Bible. It existed quite a ways prior to the Torah of Moses. Did they know about it? I don't know. I don't know. I kind of. Yeah, certainly. But when we come upon the Hebrews in Egypt, they seem to be completely ignorant about everything. So if they had, I don't know how literate they were as slaves in Egypt, whether they would have had any leisure time to read. Don't know. It's a good question, though. Angela?
I think, like you said, the Torah is probably the closest we have to a book actually authored.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I'm studying, I view that first 5 books when I'm looking at a word or an idea or a concept or anything like that. I go to the Torah first, because that is the plumb line.
Absolutely.
That is the closest to the source you can possibly be. And if you are understanding something elsewhere in the Bible and it's at odds with the plumb
line, you have misunderstood that, and you need to back up and reevaluate. Everything needs to parallel and fit with the plumb line, which is the first 5 books, because that is the closest to the horse's mouth that you can possibly get.
Yeah, agreed. Carla and then Tracy.
I think one of the other things about the Torah you were mentioning, Yeshua, is that certainly in the Torah, as well as in the prophets and the writings, to know what the Torah says helps you know who the Messiah is.
Mm-hmm.
So it defines it. We should know it so that we know the truth of who the Messiah is.
Absolutely. And yes, when you're looking at the Torah and seeing what you can learn about the Messiah from the Torah, that was one of the tremendous blessings that I had in going through the Torah cycle with somebody who was so focused on showing Yeshua in the Torah. In fact, he used to say, how do you know that Jesus is the Messiah? Is it because your grandmother told you so? Right. That's hearsay. Right. That's not an actual witness. That's just, you presume it to be so. And that's fine, but wouldn't you like to know for sure that Yeshua is the Messiah? That's how you know, because you read the Torah and you see Yeshua in the Torah, and it guarantees you that Yeshua is the Messiah. Because otherwise you can be tricked. And I have not known very many people, but I have known a couple who have tripped over into Judaism from being a Christian and not really knowing their scriptures very well at all, coming into the Hebrew Roots movement and just tripping right over into Judaism because they had no knowledge of their Bibles to begin with. And somebody could come along and say, Yeshua's not really the Messiah. They had no idea, and they just fell away and became a Jew. That's not what you want. That is definitely not what you want. So if you know what your Torah says and you're looking at it with spiritual eyes to see the revelation of the Messiah in the Torah, that's big. That's big stuff. Tracy?
I just wanted to add on to what Andrew said about the plumb line, is that it's a measuring line. Make straight the way of the Lord. It's measuring to make sure things are straight, that we may rightly divide.
Right.
And if you throw out the plumb line, if you throw out the measuring line, with what do you measure?
Yeah.
We all become our own. We have our own truths, and there's nothing defining good and evil. And
that's the biggest problem in the world today.
And that's why people look at us, to Christians, and say, well, you're not doing what that says, and that's the hypocrisy of it. We need to make sure we're upholding that.
That's the biggest problem with the world and Christianity, and I know you've all heard it your whole lives, that anybody who's not a churched person or doesn't believe in Jesus just says a bunch of hypocrites. And they're true. It's true. It's absolutely true. I mean, for most of the people I know, and we all stumble. I think maybe we weren't as humble as we could have been, and telling them, no, I'm not perfect. I'm not even close, but I have a goal. I have a plumb line that I can measure my life by and see how I'm doing,
And when you really start to learn and receive and understand, that's when you really start to know how little you know. Like the more I know, I don't know very much.
That was a huge thing.
Way more than I knew then.
That was a huge thing. Yeah, that was a huge thing for me when I first got into the Hebrew Roots movement, was reading through the Torah with this new understanding of, hey, this might actually be relevant to me. It was truly humbling to realize. I realized that the righteousness of God was far away from me. And it made me so keenly aware of how much I needed the Messiah Yeshua to take away my sins, because I suddenly got exposed to the plumb line. I suddenly realized how righteous God was and what he actually expected, and how I could never, ever do that. I couldn't achieve what he wanted me to achieve. Now, I can do a whole lot better than I had been, and I have gotten better. But when I realized, and somebody told me this as a Christian a long, long time ago, it's like, well, how does one get into heaven? By doing 51% of the commandments? Is it a balancing scale? It's like, well, God's going to weigh you in a scale and say, well, you were 51% good. No, the balance has to go like this. In order to get into the kingdom, to be a child of God, perfection is demanded. Now, who can do that? Nobody. Yeshua. Period. So we rely.
Says, I thank the Lord.
That's it. Yeah, you can't do it. You're not getting to perfection, but that's the standard.
You're supposed to strive to go.
That's the goal. That's the goal, and that's the standard. Jan has to go first.
Well, I'm going to soon do this really short thing. That I
You're going to do a thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a really short story of this dream that the Lord gave me.
Okay.
Okay. So, we were at a church that you would think would be legalistic, that would be all about the rules and the ducks in a row.
Mhm.
And I'll be honest with you, we haven't had our ducks in a row before James got sick.
Okay.
So ducks in a row are not really, and it's really nice to have examples and mentors for people that are strong enough to have their ducks in a row, because we look up to those people and we need those people in our lives.
Those people aren't real, just so you're. I've never met anybody who had their ducks in a row.
Ducks in a row, and there are people in this room that don't have their ducks in a row. So the Lord, gave me this story. James was still in the hospital with the H1N1 on a respirator, and they asked me to come and speak at 2 different occasions, one at a women's group and one in a Sunday school class. And I'm thinking, I'm at the hospital 90 miles away. Why are you asking me to come and speak? I'm like, no. And they're like, well, we think that you need to do this. So I had to go do it, right? And I'm like, my husband's dying, and I'm doing this. Crazy, right?
That doesn't seem
So,
right.
The Lord gave me this one dream, and my husband and I were in this little rowboat, and we were rowing along, and we were just, singing to Jesus and just doing just fine, just rowing along, like getting by, doing our thing like we still do. And this boat went by, and it just like was a party boat. It just land-bashed us. I mean, like they're all just screaming and yelling and just like dumping water on us and just being worldly, and it was just horrible. And we started sinking, right? And then here came the boat with all the church friends, and they all started screaming, "We don't care that you don't have your ducks in a row. Get on board with us." And they saved us. And they lifted us up out of the water. And it was the same people that were in the Sunday school class that I was going to speak at the next week.
Oh.
And I had to tell the story, and I was kind of like, I'm not even going to give you the details as why we don't have our ducks in a row, but I know that you guys didn't care, because the Lord told me you didn't care. And so,
Interesting.
ducks in a row is kind of like, we all want to be there, but Jesus doesn't condemn. He gives us answers to mercy, grace, and truth to get to where we need to be. But when our ducks aren't in a row, he doesn't condemn.
Yeah.
He gives us answers.
And thank you for sharing that. And I think the important wisdom here is to recognize, I don't even know how to make ducks line up, so anybody who, I know all of you fairly well, and I'm not kicking anybody under the bus when I say that I don't think any of you got your ducks all lined up. I ain't kidding. I know you all got the same problems I have. I don't know anybody perfect here.
Ducks in a row is love your neighbor as yourself. That's
Praise
that
the Lord.
story.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
exactly it. And what we all have is some piece of a duck
Yeah.
tribute. And when we all come together and love each other as we're to do, they all line up.
There you go.
Thank you.
Good wisdom. Thank you. Tracy,
Oh.
you were not going to say anything? Was it you, Angela?
Angela.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Don't be scared. You can talk. Please.
I was thinking something, but I was like, no.
You were saying this whole thing about achieving perfection and that we just can't do it. And then I started thinking about and that almost seems like someone dangling something over your head. You can't do that. You just can never achieve that. And to me, that's just cruel. But what I've come to realize after studying this stuff is this whole
idea of you have to achieve this, it's actually merciful. It's like he said, if you do 51% of it, does that mean you're in? If you had 51% of your hazmat suit, would you then want to go into the disease place? No, it's protection. You cannot do 51% of your protective suit and enter into God's presence. You will be damaged.
You'll be burned
and
up.
He is merciful. He's like, this is what you have to do to be in my presence.
Yeah.
And so to me, that was like, that's so much different from this idea of achieving perfection that I grew up with, where it was just like some, like a tease.
Mm-hmm.
You can never be that. It's never good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was like, he is loving, even in this idea of this is what you need to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, Jimmy.
You know how our rules in the world are kind of arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
Like a jury has to be 12.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to drive 55 here and 65 there and 35 here. Those are just kind of arbitrary numbers. And the church I grew up in, they felt that a lot of the rules in the Torah were like that, just kind of like God, just kind of like this is do it this way, and they didn't realize that it came out of his character.
Yeah, absolutely.
And his character, because his character doesn't change.
Right.
See, they dispensed with the Sabbath, and I mean, every Christmas it was country ham. Every house in Tennessee, if you didn't have that, you didn't have your ducks in a row.
Yeah.
And that's the way good people live.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracy?
It's arbitrary.
It's important to really understand that man's version of perfect is not God's version of perfect as well.
Yeah.
Because God said David's heart was perfect toward him. Messiah says, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
We are expected to be perfect, but not according to what man calls perfect.
Yeah.
And it says in
Totally.
1 Kings, let your heart therefore be perfect with Yahovah our God, to walk in his statutes and to keep his commandments as this day. And that's what David did.
Mm-hmm.
We know David wasn't perfect, right?
So it must mean something different.
It's a matter of the heart and your desire to have a heart that is willing to do his will when it is revealed to you.
Yeah.
His blood takes care of all of it.
There you go. Absolutely.
Washed in the blood.
That's right. That's right. So I would be very surprised if you heard anything different or contrary to what you have heard in traditional Christianity as far as what Yeshua's place is and what he does for us and the purpose of his death and the sacrificial atonement that covers all sins. It's all the same stuff, but from a very new and unique perspective, I think. And I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. However, let's actually dive into this Torah portion. Good preliminary discussion, necessary, I think.
Now we have to read. Tease them and then they'll have to.
Yeah. Okay. Want to just go through a couple of key points of Parsha Bereshit, okay? Why did God set up the creation the way that he did? Now, Angela taught about this a year and a half or so ago, I think, when we did a study over Genesis. And she had some really amazing insight into, if you haven't seen this, you can go to the YouTube or our website or whatever and look at the Genesis study that we did a few years back, where we went through the book of Genesis much more slowly and deeply. But the question is, in relation to, why did God set up the creation in the way that he did, and what does this teach us about ourselves and about him and what we need to do, is, why does he hide himself? Why did he set up an adversary to oppose us? Why do we have to die a physical death? What are your thoughts about that in relation to this portion? Because all this stuff is set up here, where God is creating this world and then kind of disappears off the scene in a way. He's not seen. Huh?
Ambassadors.
Okay, this is a good. He said ambassadors. Okay, we'll explore that just a little bit, but tell me a little bit about what you mean, Jimmy.
He set it up. He got it rolling. And then he said, now I want you to be my viceroy. Say, I'm the boss, but I want you to enjoy making this work according to the way I'm laying out the rules, and have victory over my adversary.
Okay, yeah, no, I totally agree with you 100%. I think I want to back up just a little bit from that, though. I want to back up just kind of prior to that, because what I'm thinking of is, why did he set up the creation in such a way that he is not there physically all the time? Why could... What I mean is, he's not here. He's here spiritually, but why can't you see him? Why can't you interact with him? Why is it necessary?
He's not physical.
Well, I know, and I know that many of you are thinking, but you can interact with him. He's right there all the time, and I can pray to him and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, of course I understand that. But why can't you physically see him with your eyes? Why has he set it up such that he is removed from you? Don't take that spiritually. Take that literally.
So you'll seek him.
So that you'll seek him. That's a good insight. Who? Another hand over here. Jerry?
As a physical human being, if you saw him, you'd die.
Okay, that's a good piece of wisdom. Gracie?
If you could see him, you know you have to obey. If you can't see him, it's like a mom saying, go back in your room and do such and such, and they go back in the room. Well, she can't see him now. Do they love her enough to obey? Or are they going to get by with what they can? And I think that's...
Thank you. That's a good piece of wisdom. Tracy?
I
You
don't know.
don't know?
Yeah.
Angela?
You never know what your kids would really do until you're not there.
Absolutely. If I'm hawking on my kid and I'm watching him 24/7, he's going to behave like an angel. More than likely. But when I walk away and I send him out into the world, or he knows that I ain't looking over his shoulder, he's going to behave like perhaps in a different way.
And that is the start of free will. And do you want to be loved because you sat there and talked on your kid to love you? Or do you want that voluntary, spontaneous, choose to love?
There you go.
That's what you want.
There you go. Mike?
Oh, just real quick, want versus need, playing off of what Angela said. You know, if he was always here, then we would need him to be always here. And want is always stronger than need. Because when you need, it could be an unhealthy dependency, but want is so pure from the heart.
There you go.
Maybe slightly out there, we continue the want.
Yeah. And I think that that's a good wisdom there, is that he is hidden in the way that a parent would play hide and seek with a child. It's not like I'm going to, jump in my car and make you go find me, because the child's not going to want to play if you can't be found. Mikey?
I'm just wondering if the walk in relationship was different before the fall, right? Because maybe he didn't really set it up that way. That wasn't the intention.
Right.
We know that flesh and blood can't dwell in that kingdom. It's that spiritual nature that has to be with him. So
Absolutely.
They may not have had the same restrictions as far as seeing the way that we do. It was that separation that occurred, and now we're on this path to rebuild.
And try and find our way back, which is repentance.
Right.
Turning.
Right. Was Gracie or?
Well, kind of backing up a little bit, but when we were always told when we were kids, I can't remember who said it to me first, I just remember hearing it many times. What you think of when you're alone, and what you do and what you say, or what you want to do, or whatever, and dwell on, when nobody else is looking, is what you really are.
Indeed. Absolutely.
You're going to obey the speed limit because you see the cop up there with
Right,
his
hit the
radar
brakes.
on, and you slow down. Then you know you're doing what you shouldn't be doing.
Yep. Absolutely. I agree 100%. Angela?
I think that even before the fall, there was a degree of hiddenness.
Yeah.
Because if he had been standing there when the snake had talked to Eve, that's a And
Yeah.
so, and then he shows up later. It says they heard,
They heard the sound of the Lord in the garden. Didn't
Yeah.
say they saw him walking in
Right.
the garden.
So I'm not sure
Coming through
what
the trees.
degree his presence was with it, but I know that there was a degree of hiddenness.
Hmm. It has to be.
They were in the
Before
habit
that.
of meeting with him every evening in the garden.
We don't know what they were in the habit of. We just know that he
Sounds
showed
like
up.
their fellowship, that he went to walk and talk with him. I can't remember how it exactly says it.
Well, it just says that they heard the sound of the Lord in the garden in the evening. That's all it says. We don't know what that means exactly. We can assume certain things, but we would be assuming.
He's
We,
always been sound to us.
that's an important part, is that we need to learn to hear and not just see, because you can see in the Genesis narrative of chapter 3 how things went terribly wrong because she relied upon her sight
And
instead of her hearing.
That's why Israel is supposed to hear.
Hear, O Israel. It doesn't say see, O Israel. It says hear, O Israel. Right. That's very critical. Tracy?
I think a lot of this has to do with him determining whether or not he can trust us.
Yeah.
We see that in the gathering the manna, to see
Mhm.
what is in your heart, whether you
Mhm.
keep my Torah or not.
Yep.
And we know that our goal is to get back to the garden, and what he did with Adam was to put him in charge of his own place. It's God's creation, but Adam
Yep.
put him in charge to guard it and protect it, and
Mhm.
to keep it and tend it.
Mhm.
And that's what is written is going to happen again in the kingdom, is that he's going to give us, whatever it is, looks like, I don't know, but he's going to give us charge over things again.
Mhm.
And he wants to know what is in our heart.
Mhm.
And again, like with why he hides his word and his commands, why he doesn't just reveal that to people, it's because it's treasure. And which one of you has treasure that, gold or whatever, that you just lay in your front yard for anyone to take?
Mhm.
It's something that you must seek, treasure
Yeah.
map type of
Right,
thing.
right. That's a critical point, and I think that's what I wanted to get to with why God set up the creation the way he did, is because this is the way it's going to work. He needs you to learn to see and not hear. He needs you to we have to learn how to walk by faith and not by sight. He has to learn to be able to trust us. He wants to make sure that we're going to do what we're going to do when nobody's looking, and so that we have free will.
And I think a lot of people think there's going to be some kind of magic download where all of a sudden I'm going to be obedient in the kingdom. And I don't think that's the case, because that is not the pattern that he's laid out. Our time of testing is now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have often wondered about that, and we don't have a whole lot of information about it. But yeah, I think that's a common perception. Whether it's accurate or not remains to be seen. But you got to wonder about that suddenly you're going to become perfect, and you're not going to have any desire to sin anymore. There are a couple of scriptures in the New Testament that describing some things that happen at the end of the millennium that seem to preclude that. So I'm a little confused about that. There's some difficult things that I just don't understand very well. But yeah, we're going to have to learn, and we will probably be continuously learning and rewarded for how faithful we are with what we have learned. So it's important why God set up the creation the way that he did, so that we learn those things. The enemy, for example, that force, spiritual force, it's even sometimes inside of us, and then there's I'm kind of up in the air about the relationship between the adversary and the inner person that is struggling. We talked about that when Jimmy taught with that evil inclination. What is the connection between those two things? Because in Judaism, they're often the same thing. And I don't know how to describe that. And I wouldn't go so far as to say that I'm on the path of thinking that the devil is a metaphor. I don't know that that's actually true. But what I'm saying is that the adversary is nothing more than resistance training. It's exactly as we were talking about previously, where that's how you get stronger, is by resisting. You have to have something to push against. That's why there is evil and good. Because if it was all good and no evil, there's no comparison, there's no contrast. And you also look at the idea of, what exactly happened when Adam and Eve ate that apple? Did they suddenly become infested with sin? That's not what the Torah says. What happened when they ate that apple?
They died spiritually.
Death came into the world. And so all men inherited death. Not sin, death. In fact, she sinned long before she ate the apple. Didn't she? In what way did Adam sin long before his wife handed him the apple?
He didn't protect.
He did not guard and he did not protect that garden. What was the serpent doing there? Is he protecting the garden? No, he's not. She saw that it was good to the eye and desirable for food. What is that describing? That's coveting. She's got coveting inside her. She hasn't touched that apple yet. So
It's the
did...
same Hebrew word in the
Great
Ten
point.
Commandments. That
Yeah,
coveting.
absolutely it is.
Very good point.
And here's another thing. You notice that it says that the serpent was cunning. You know what that word is? Arum. You know what it says the humans were naked? It's the same word. Something very interesting is happening here. Sin was already there. It became a real thing when she took physical action. And this is, Yeshua talked about this. If you lust after a woman in your heart, it's already done. That potentiality was already there. When she reached out and made it a physical thing is when death became a real thing. It became alive. Sin became alive. She brought it into her physical body by reaching out and grabbing that apple and eating it. It became a physical act at that point. Tracy and then Carla.
Yahweh said that fruit is not food, it is not good. But then it says in the text, the woman saw that it was good. And how many of us today do things that God says is not good, but we think it's good?
Well, hold on a second. Now, hold on a second. You said that he said that is not good. That's actually not what he said.
Well,
Every tree in the garden was
he said,
good.
Don't eat it, it is not good
Don't
for
eat
food."
it. Well, he didn't say it wasn't good for food. He said, don't eat it, period.
Well, I think that's probably what he meant, is that it's not good, just like don't, if
That's a good,
something it's not good for you to eat.
clearly. Now, I'm just saying, he said, he created all the trees in the garden and it was good. Now, and you might ask yourself, I hope you would, or did at some point, doesn't God want you to know the difference between good and evil? Why did he tell them not to eat it?
Not by experience.
Thank you. That's a good point. Not by experience, by wisdom. I can tell my children don't do drugs. They can learn it that way, or they can go do drugs and experience the negativity and the addiction and the, whatever else negative happens to you from doing drugs. There are two ways of learning things.
I think also that God cannot look upon sin.
Yes.
So he needs something or a device, a teaching device, like you said,
Yes.
to teach us
Yes.
and to get us freedom.
And that's,
He himself cannot really look upon sin.
yes.
So
That's why these things are always brought to the physical, is because we're physical creatures and we learn by physical means. Carla and then Brianna.
I was just going to comment about him, God telling them to eat of the trees, that fruit yielding trees in the garden, because it is food for them. And they didn't do that. They didn't eat of the tree of life before they tried the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So
Okay.
they didn't do what they were.
Yeah, they were not following the instructions from the get-go. So the eating the apple did not suddenly introduce sin. The Torah doesn't say that it introduced sin. It introduced death. Brianna.
I'm still confused.
We're all terribly confused.
All the trees in the garden were good. Was it a literal fruit, or was it something that she did because saying that Satan maybe was not good, not mess with him, and not...
That's a mystical meaning, and I don't know. We're all thoroughly confused about this because it's not terribly clear. I think we had... Yeah, and I am perfectly willing to say that this was a literal piece of fruit, but I'm also perfectly willing to say this is a metaphor for something else. I don't know. But what I am saying is We don't know. There's some mystery here. And did you know, and I'll just throw this out there and then I'm going to field some more questions, that it is common in rabbinic circles to say that this Torah portion is the hardest one to teach. It's full of mystery, lots of unanswered questions. It's very mysterious and difficult to understand. Who was going to go? Evan, you don't want to say something, do you? Okay.
One thing, I'm surprised at how bad evil in the world can be. I'm surprised it's gotten as far out as it has. It's kind of shocking. And the other thing is I think it's interesting that the adjectives that God used to describe the devil and the people was the same, as though we have something in common with the devil.
But unfortunately,
he says that that the serpent was a room, which is crafty or cunning, and that the Adam and Eve were a room. Had no
as in naked, yeah. Hayden?
I was wondering how the tree could be good, but not good to eat, and I thought, well, that's happened before. Pigs are good, not if you eat them. Right? You have garbage, you have plenty of other uses. If they exist, then you leave them alone, but if you start trying to eat them, that's bad.
Yeah, and I don't. That is certainly possible that it was a tree. It was a good tree. It was just not made for food. However, it is fruit bearing, and it's not my opinion exactly. It's my surmising and thinking about this that it is perhaps true that God did intend for them to eat of it, but not yet. They were not ready. Possibly. Wow. That was a piece of fruit that was for. I mean, you don't feed steak to a baby, right? So perhaps that tree was just. He's like, I don't intend that you eat it now. You'll be eating of that later. You need to learn to grow and understand me and learn through wisdom so that I can trust you with knowledge. I'm throwing that out there as a complete bombshell, and I'm not saying, hey, we should have been eating the fruit. I'm saying the time was not right. He told him not to do it. But it's my supposition that it's possible that he might have given them that ability later. Just throwing that out there. Kick me if you want. Mikey.
That's wild.
Oh, I just very thankful that this is such a sweet time and we're just all expressing from the heart and getting in touch. But I do think in my heart and mind, when I think about all this, the crux of it is if we are hungering and thirsting after and yearning after His righteousness, if that is where we are, then that's our blockade against the evil.
Yeah.
And we cannot always be there 24/7, every second by second.
Sure.
But that being the goal,
Mm-hmm.
and if we take it back to the original sin, there was not at that moment the hungering and thirsting after His righteousness.
Sure. Absolutely. Mikey?
I was just going to comment on maybe it wasn't time for us to eat of that tree. Because it seems like it would never be okay because it's a mixed bag, right? Like He doesn't like us mixing things. So a mixture of good and evil doesn't seem like that would be something
That's a good point. Good point.
That's the point of that tree is that it's a mixed fruit.
But would he create a tree that had mixed fruit?
Who's hanging around that tree?
Well, yeah, okay.
It doesn't say God planted it either. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's
There's an enemy did it.
There is actually some commentary in the Talmud that suggests two things. One, that the serpent was actually not a creation of God. However, right in the text it says that the serpent was craftier than any of the creatures that God had created. Mm-hmm. So it seems to, but if you look at the way that is worded in Hebrew, it literally says something like that. It's like the serpent was more crafty than any other creature of the field that God had created. The rabbis have suggested as a possibility that Satan created the serpent. They also have suggested that Satan invented this tree, that this was not planted there by God. Just throwing that out there as a possibility. This is all completely useless speculation, but it's fascinating, and I agree with what Mike said, it does seem to have some mixed fruit on it. Darren,
Well, I hold to the position that he did because the
don't
cornerstone
hold to any position.
Well, this is my logic. The
Thank you.
cornerstone to Judaism is your Shema.
Yeah.
How can you ever love the Lord with everything if you're only taught one side of it? True love comes from having opposition.
Yes.
Yeshua says, "Those who overcome get the crown of eternal life, not those who just that's all they know."
Good point. Good point. Angela, and then Tracy.
Tracy, is yours short because mine is not.
Maybe. I'll try to make it short.
It's not Darren, so hold Darren in your head.
Well, go ahead, Darren.
Come close to me.
Some of you were here when we taught that first word in Genesis before, so this is just a review, and others, this is the teaser, and you should just go watch it because it's fun. The first word in the Bible is Bereshit, right here, and what we did was we took this word and we looked at the first letter and why it's a B, and what comes before the B, and why that's not there, and why it's silent, and all those things. But one of the things we did during that lesson was we divided this word in half. And this word means, Bereshit means in the beginning. But if you divide it in half, this bara means he created. And this part over here can be interpreted three ways. You can interpret it as 6. He created 6. And we talked about that in Jonah. He created, for 6 days he created. He also created 6,000 years for us. So he created time. He created, that can mean garment. And if you were reading, I think it's Isaiah, he talks about how the heavens are his garment. And he was clothed and hides himself, because he hides in darkness, remember? So he's hiding in darkness. Okay, so he's not, and that's what we talked about a little earlier with his presence, that he's removed himself a bit to give us the freedom to have faith and love. We wouldn't know what love was unless he gave us the room to actually express it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then time, he gives us this fourth dimension of time in order to experience something, have a delay, and then, which is also a part of loving.
Reflect back on it.
You have to have that element. So he's created these things to teach us love. And then the last thing it can mean, sheet, this part here, is thorns. And Paul defines a thorn, Satan, an adversary. And that is the other choice. Okay, if he was the only choice, then again, we cannot express love. So without these three elements, without time, without some distance, and without option B, we cannot love, we cannot know what love is. And so he's, in the beginning, he created these three things in order for us to experience love towards each other and towards him. So, and that was just a small piece of that thing that we did with that first Genesis study.
Yeah, it's very good insight. Tracy?
So it's actually good that you went first, because I think I tend to lean toward that he did put the tree there, because I think that this tree represents flesh and spirit. I think just as we are made up of flesh and spirit, and we struggle, this inner man with our outer man. And I just see that here with what's taking place. Which one are you going to allow to rule? And we see that Cain allowed flesh man to rule. And then now Cain has his own lineage after that. So I think we're looking at sons of God versus sons of flesh, and that Satan is called a beast, like I talked about before, of the field. The field is the world, so these people of the world.
Yeah.
And that we either take on the image of the beast, the image or mark of a beast, or the image of God, which is spirit. So I think this is like the beginning of that story being told.
Yeah, good insight. Carla?
Well, in talking about the garden and who planted the seed of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it doesn't matter because God allowed it.
Right.
There you go.
And it was there when he told Adam and Eve
Yep.
not to do it.
Good point.
Just a comment about the word good, tov. When you look at it in one perspective, it's something that is doing what it was created to do. It's fulfilling its purpose. Evil, it's it's not fulfilling its purpose. Just ideas.
No, excellent. Tracy?
Oh, way back, you said that Adam and Eve sinned before they even got to the tree. That Adam was not taking care of the garden, and that she was sinning in just talking to the serpent or something.
No, that she.
But I didn't know where you got all this. That before they actually sinned with the fruit.
Okay.
That they had already been sinning.
Sure. No, I understand. And what I would say, and I tried to clarify that a little bit by saying that when she took that apple, it became a physical act, and that I would propose to you that the propensity for sin was already there, that there was a seed of rebellion in them, okay, and that there was a certain amount of lust for wanting what they did not have, which is a sin, because Yeshua will tell us that if it's in your heart, you just haven't done the physical act yet, it's still sin. And so I would say, to the point that Adam was told, keep, guard, and serve that garden. That the fact that there was an enemy in the garden tempting his wife lets me know that he had already failed on his job of protecting. So that he failed to do what he was.
Isn't a sin unless you.
Well, not according to you. Not according to Yeshua.
But when she saw it, that was
As a man lusteth in his heart,
Mm-hmm.
after a woman, he has as much as done it.
Yeah.
There is one thing to do with getting that thought in your heart and just saying no.
Yeah.
This is bad.
Well, and I think.
Or in just dwelling on it and enjoying the
Right.
thoughts and all
Now
that.
you have to read between the lines a little bit, because is the adversary going to tempt her with something she doesn't want? No, he's not. He knew that she had probably been circling that tree for some time, taking a look at it. It was pleasant to the eye and desirable for. We're reading between the lines here, but you know how the adversary works. He's not going to go to little old sweet Gracie and say, Gracie, why don't you do some heroin? That's not good. That's not going to appeal to you. You know what I'm saying? It's like certain things are not going to appeal to certain people. So that just gives me a little bit of insight, I think, that he's tempting her with something she wants. She has already begun to contemplate that tree. And it's in fact interesting that when he said to her, oh, did indeed God say you shall not eat of that tree? She said, not only that, God said we can't touch it. That's a lie. That's not, she added to the Torah and made something up.
She may have been fighting that desire.
I believe she had been fighting that
They
desire.
were created with the ability to make that choice.
Absolutely.
So
What does that mean?
That you got the ability to make the choice does not presuppose God knew ahead of time that she'd make that choice.
Sure.
But it didn't force her decision.
No, it did not. No, it did not. Therefore, I would only say that there was propensity to sin, and perhaps the beginnings of some lust and some coveting. That's why the devil would tempt her with something.
If the serpent was in the garden, he must have been created by God, or was allowed there by God. God didn't
Absolutely,
create him.
yeah, and that's what Tracy or Carla was saying. One of those two. It's like it would, God doesn't, even if he didn't do it himself, he allowed it. So there you go. Now hold on a second before this is delightful. I'm just going to throw out there that the time is nigh for us to quit, but I'm delighted to keep going, but I got lots of hands going up here to continue this conversation. So now Keith hasn't said anything. We're going to roll the dice here to see who gets to go first. No, I'm kidding. We're not going to do that. No, hold on. Darren and Brianna don't hardly ever talk, and Keith doesn't talk very much, so I'm going to give an opportunity for those people to say something and try to wrap us up so that we can get this thing done with. Keith?
Okay, so all these animals talk, right?
Yeah.
Well, one of them does.
When she walked up in the tree, she wasn't startled there's a talking snake, right? Because all the animals talk. So we lost that somewhere too, right? Because we can't communicate with the animals like they could.
A little bit.
Yeah, apparently. I'm not willing to speculate. I don't know.
Or did Hasid the snake talk.
I like that idea better.
But it would still have shocked her that they were covered.
Okay, that's a good question. And if you have the answer, email me later.
This word for snake, what's the word that they use in the Hebrew for snake?
Nachash.
Something that it has something to do with scales and shininess.
Yes, that is true.
Is that true?
Tracy will tell you. She knows.
Well, what if, before he was told he'll be on his belly to slide around, what if she walked up and she goes, "Hey, I know this shiny guy. He's been around here before." And he wouldn't lie because he was sort of like one of God's right-hand men.
That's certainly possible.
And when I asked him about, he asked me about the tree, I said, "Yeah, I know I'm not supposed to eat from this, but is that what he really said?" Well, wait, you were around probably when he knows you're smarter than I am. I'm going to trust this guy. Take the apple.
He was a lawyer.
He was a lawyer.
He is.
Okay, hold on.
So a lot of those things still are undeveloped for me. When did the
Like I said,
shiny
yes.
and taking a form?
Like I said a minute ago, this is thoroughly, there's a lot to explore here. There are not a lot of answers, but a lot of questions.
Well, he's jealous. He just watched God give Adam the ability to name all the creatures.
Yeah?
He's buddying up with Adam pretty good here, yet he used to be the right-hand man.
Yes.
Watching Adam get all these privileges, the next thing you know, there's this lady involved, and then, now she's coming up with the tree.
There's all kinds of problems here. Yes, absolutely. Hold on. Which one of you two? Darren?
About what you were saying, it reminded me of James chapter 1. It says, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin begets death.
There you go.
So,
There you go.
desire,
Bingo.
wicked desire will always lead to death. So, about her, she did beget sin before she actually chose to actually the action.
So what we can say is that God allowed allowed for the possibility. Angela?
And when she consumed it into her body, that's when she passed it on to her descendants.
Which is perfect for what I wanted to say.
She burned it.
No.
Okay, Tracy has the last word.
Well, I don't have to look, but it's just, if we consider this tree of the knowledge of good and evil as doctrine, and that the point of it, why she desired it, is because she wanted to be wise like God, and that this has infiltrated the body. This is what we're looking at. I mean,
Yeah.
this is false doctrine that she ate and passed on. I mean, this is what we're seeing here.
Yep.
Don't mix my word with man's word.
Yep. There you go. Good job. Thank you. Now I'm gonna just point out these last couple of questions to you before I just pray and wrap this up, and you can go to the very end of the teaching to look at these questions that I have for you for possible study over the next couple of days. Does the creation of man and woman reflect the greater creation in general? It really does. I would suggest to you that you take a look at that, how there are certain things that were created in one way, taken apart, and then will later be put back together. This is the same story of a man and a woman. Take a look at that, and how do those two things go together? The spiritual lessons regarding the fall, gaining knowledge and yet becoming blind. I will propose to you that when you you had your eyes opened with the ability to see, you became acutely aware of all the nooks and crannies and faults of everyone around you, and yet blind to your own. There's a mix there. Taking a look at what are some of the do's that we are to do in this section. Things like be fruitful and multiply does not necessarily, sorry Brianna and Darren, mean have gobs of children. I'm making a joke. No. Well, no, I'm serious. I'm thinking to you, not you, to everyone, be fruitful and multiply can be interpreted in many ways. Okay, not just having children. But
we need to put some more light in this dark world.
only if they're trained and they're taught. So yes, absolutely. A man will leave his father and mother. It's not a commandment exactly, but you can read into that. Okay, and what does it mean for a man to leave his father and mother? Doesn't have to be literal. Think about that. Work and keep the garden. That can be, you can apply work and keep to your life. We'll call this your garden. Okay, so those are some commandments that I would say bear in mind and contemplate this week. And then a reminder is brought forth in right when we're introduced to Noah in the beginning of chapter 6 that God will judge the world. Okay, and then I would strongly encourage you to read the Haftorah portion of Isaiah 42 through 43. Fascinating discussion of this whole section from the beginning to the end, from the creation to the destruction of everything. It's all right there in 42 and 43 in Isaiah. Let us pray.